Hey folks, Steve here with a special review video for you today. We are going to be looking at I, Napoleon, designed by Ted Raicer, released by GMT. This is a game that just recently came out, and I managed to fit it into my busy game schedule. This is a game that is self-described in the rulebook as a solitaire role-playing game, which is very different, I think, to the way games and its like are described. Whether or not that's fully, I guess, the right description, I don't know. It sort of is. It is enough for the game because this is not explicitly just a war game. It's not a game about the Napoleonic Wars. It's not a game about a specific battle or a specific set of conflicts that Napoleon was involved in. This is a game about Napoleon the person, and that involves political concerns, marital concerns, and yes, the concerns of war. And I'll say that I have been able to play this, I don't know, like at least 10 times. I think it's at least 10. I have played this now several times over. I think I've gained a lot of knowledge on the game, and admittedly, I have played some things wrong during those 10 playthroughs. So even watching my early look and post-mortem sort of play commentary videos, even those are kind of strewn with mistakes that I had made, things I wasn't playing quite right. I do think I am now on top of all of those things and I'm playing correctly. And I have to say, a very interesting game experience. And we're going to talk about more about the gameplay here very shortly and my deep sort of analysis of the game and what I think of it here shortly. So this is going to be a little bit more of my usual style review video for you. But just some context for this, Ted Raicer has designed a number of games, most famous probably for Paths of Glory. So this is something that's really different from Ted on subjects that I am not, I wasn't sure if he was, really into or not. I don't think he's done any other Napoleonic games, as far as I know. But it does seem like he's put a lot of thought into the game design here, and this could be the start of a new series. Who knows? If this game does well enough, it could spur some additional games in its like. Who knows? You can think of great historical figures that would be interesting to play through. I do think for at least the style of card play, and this is a game that you'll see is very much card-based. I think Napoleon's saga is a good one to cover because of all of its sort of starts and stops and ups and downs and really a long progression of events that are very active. There's always something going on in Napoleon's life after he becomes a young adult. So, you try to look at it and go, well, who else would be a good match for this system? Who knows? We'll have to see. But I do think the system works pretty well, and we'll take a look at that here in just a moment. So if you don't actually care about the game mechanics and how it all works, or maybe you've watched some of the earlier videos and you think you've got a pretty good understanding, you can go ahead and skip to the concluding thoughts and analysis bits of the video. I'll put a sequence cut here with a timestamp that you can jump to. If you just care about that, that's okay. And if you don't, you don't care about the game mechanics explanation because you think you've already got it. But if you want to see the way the game operates, I think I can explain it pretty well now, having gone through it many times. That'll be the next part of the video. So let's check it out. Okay, here is the game map. Now, this is not a game map that shows, well, it does show the geography of Europe if you kind of notice it in between the boxes. And the boxes are mostly aligned on that map as to where they are geographically. But really, this is not a move dudes around the map kind of map. This game board is more representing either places, concept, things, perhaps. And just to do, excuse me, a quick tour around the map, there's a general records track up in the top left that is tracking a couple of different resources and mechanics and ratings that you're keeping track of in terms of numbers. There's a year track that goes from 1793 to 1816, technically 1817 to 1821, is the last turn and comprises of multiple years. But usually, except for the last turn, each turn is a year, starting in 1793. There's a card draw track, which we'll talk about in a moment. There's a sequence of play right on the map. There's tables for domestic politics and campaign combat resolution, along with diplomacy, and a handy-dandy track to help you keep track of your DRMs, die roll modifiers, in the midst of play. There's spots for current treaties, commanders, what campaign is being played, campaign modifiers, as well as the strategy and tactics cards that you'll be using in the game. At the beginning of the game, you have Bonaparte Leads, which is a quite effective card. And then we have a number of other sort of life places here. Chief of Staff, Minister of Police, Talleyrand's status, politics, the box for Napoleon himself. You'll notice a card there with the hat. And then up top, it might be a little hard to see, there's Bonaparte family, wife, and Napoleon's bet. So those are all kind of dealing with Napoleon's familial standings and situation. Now, up top here, and this is just where I found it to be convenient to place the cards and get them when I need them. The game is mostly card-based. There are a few die-rolling things and decisions that you'll be making along the way. But basically, there is a sequence of cards that are added to your draw deck over time. At the beginning of the game, you are using the CMD cards, which this is short for Commander. So this is from the time in which Napoleon is a commander. So they'll tend to have the notation here, CMD. That's where they come from. And then the cards will say in the bottom right when this card leaves the game. And it's usually, it'll be noted in the card text. So when we see Desai here, he's going to be in our commander's box. He's got a loyalty factor that is related to something that happens or can happen in the late game, but you tend not to need to worry about it. But it's good to know he's an independent commander. I'll try to explain that here shortly. And then we can spend a resource called administrative points, A points, to get a die roll in combat or get an even better die roll in a later part of combat, but then he is out of the game. So just some basic, example of a card. But the way the game is structured here is you start with the commander deck, and you'll play through this for a period of time until a particular card comes up. Now, I don't want to spoil the game. I think a huge amount of the fun of this game is going to be discovering the ins and outs and the cards yourself. But there will be a card that will get played that will trigger the inclusion of these cards that are either card 29 gets played, which is in that initial commander set, or you become first consul. So you can see that CMD. There's a similar thing here, FCD, first consul deck time period. So if you get to become first consul, you add these cards, or this other event can occur, which will add more cards to the deck, adding people like Davout, which is great. Berthier, Josephine coming in. That's where you can marry Josephine, and there are consequences to doing that over the life of the game, but there are certain benefits, costs, pros and cons, decisions to be made here. But you can see some of these important pieces of history, especially Napoleon's early phases, starting to come in. Then significantly, in 1796, so this is a time-based edition, you will get more cards that are kind of, again, in that sort of late War of the First or Second Coalition time frame. And it's really Brumaire that is going to be the key card. I don't want to spoil too much, but the main thing is it's going to be some die rolling, the effects of certain cards that maybe you've had played in the game that will come in. And that will trigger first consul time period. And you see there's a whole stack. Now, what will occur here is a number of cards, and I do suggest once you get the game unwrapped that you sort of get your cards sorted this way. This is just a divider card to help sort them, so you can set that aside. But then we're going to have cards here that will say, okay, we're going to place this face down in the I Napoleon space. And if I look at it for a second, we can see, Well, that's becoming the first console for life. But we don't get that right away. That is played face down. Whereas this card is going to go into the potential treaties, and that is actually a section of the game board over here. So potential treaties, you would set the cards here, potential campaigns over here, and we'll talk about all that here in just a moment. But just to know that as you play through the deck, there are going to be some cards that you don't add to the draw deck. You actually will put them off to the side, and they will be differentiated in that these cards have these white backings as opposed to the normal draw deck cards, which have a green backing, and basically just follow the instructions. This is pretty straightforward stuff. And then the rest of these cards will get shuffled into your main deck. Now, as things continue on, after you become first console, you will have the opportunity to transition to the Empire or Emperor period, which, just to show you, is a deck much, much bigger than the first console deck. And this is where the game really changes quite a bit. And I'll talk about that as I talk through the sequence of play and how the game is really played. But just so you know, the going to the Emperor stage of the game kind of locks you into a trajectory, but the deck is at its biggest at that point and can have the most variability. Now, there are cards that are added slowly thereafter in 1807, 1809, 1810, 1814. And then finally, there's a set of cards that come in if Napoleon is forced to abdicate. And if that occurs, then you start to use the abdication cards that will have events that are tied to, you can imagine, if you've been exiled, how do you come back for a, 100 days Waterloo type of situation? Not to spoil things too much, but that is really where that starts to come in. So you can kind of get a sense that over the life of the game, you're going to have cards that you start with that are going to be very thematically tied to Napoleon's early career, before he's even a general, in fact. And as you play through and you gain more political power, more cards are added to the deck or added to the map automatically, like those white-backed cards, or I don't know, however you want to refer to that. And that will change the game state quite a bit. So your time as first console, if you can build up to that, then is very different. You start to have to worry about different things, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, as Emperor, you're now having to deal with the pressure of all the opposing countries, the opposing monarchs of Europe, wanting to snuff you out for what you represent and what you've been doing on the geopolitical stage. And each era kind of feels just slightly different in terms of the cards that obviously are being played and what they involve, the intensity of the warfare aspect of the game, and then how much agency you actually have on the map, which I think is a very important part of the gameplay. So if we want to dig deeper into the game here for a second, let's talk about the sequence of play and kind of talk through the way that this really works. So the sequence of play is here. You can follow this pretty easily. I might have wanted a more deeper sequence of play. There is one on the back of some of the rule books, but you have a little marker here to help you keep track. This is a solitaire game, so if you get up and go make a sandwich, but then get distracted by your pets, or you do something else and you come back, you got to remember where you're at. Try to use that. So the way that this will work is you've got your setup phase. This is usually just getting the cards put together, reshuffling the deck with discards at the end of a turn. So the shuffling of the deck kind of keeps things not chaotic, but dynamic. You're going to have cards that get discarded, but they come right back into the deck. So if it's a crappy event or a good event, you can have the expectation you're probably going to see it again. And so then you have the card deck phase. And really, between the year setup and the card deck phase, you're also getting income. Now, this is going to be based on your cards on the map. So there will be cards placed in various places across the map, either in Bonaparte's family, in the politics area, in the chief of staff or minister of police, Talleyrand, even cards out here amongst the European locations that will change your income for the turn. And your income is going to come in the form of either admin points, A, political points, P, diplomacy points, D, or even at times some effect on glory, which is G. Now, each of these can be used for different purposes. You can imagine diplomacy is used for diplomatic activities, and we'll talk about that when we're talking about the diplomatic phase. Admin points are used for different game effects, but probably the way that you're going to use them most is enabling commanders to basically assign commanders to campaigns that you're going to fight and use their abilities to get bonuses in combat. That's kind of the chief way to use admin points, but there are other ways that come up in the cards that allow you to do minor actions. So definitely think of admin points as your main sort of activity currency. Political points are also used for a variety of purposes, but most importantly, you're going to be trying to use them, one, to help become first consul, but even after that, to try to offset bad things related to domestic politics. Again, we'll talk about that here in just a second. Glory is really important because that is effectively a way to track victory or victory points. Now, I should say, playing the game is one thing, ending the game is another, but glory is going to be a really important metric. Glory you can look at, again, as victory points, but what you're aiming to do is to get up to 100. As soon as you ding 100 glory, you get to place this limits of glory marker, which is one of the varied victory conditions where no matter what happens to Napoleon, you'd like to hit the limits of glory. That's sort of a base objective or goal to achieve in the game. I do recommend that you try to shoot for it because that's really what is going to make or break your Napoleonic experience. You want glory, you seek glory, and there will be things that count against you to hurt your glory, but if you can play well, I think that's the key thing. By playing well, you can get more glory, you can get 100, and then you'll have expanded the limits of glory or achieved run over the limits of glory. You've done great things. So keep an eye on glory across the game. It's going to go up and down at first, but then as you start getting to the real Wars of the Coalition, ideally your glory is on an upward trajectory as you win the wars, but if you lose, then it will start to decrease. So just one measurement of victory, but it's an important one, and I would suggest you pay attention to it very carefully. There are cases where cards can be played on the map that will always drain your glory, and the results of the domestic politics table will also drain your glory. So there is a, we'll say, investment and consequence and payoff mechanic here of sometimes you got to give up some glory with the hope that you can achieve greater glory, and then you figure, well, okay, the income to my glory is offset by what I paid to get there, but you'd still rather have increased your total glory. So you're kind of playing that throughout the game. Once the cards and everything are prepared for the game turn, you have the card action phase. Basically, you're going to draw a card, and then you're going to continue to move the card draw marker down for each card that you pull until you've pulled 5 cards. Now, what you need to do is roll a die, and this game uses a 1d10, and if that number is not in the die range listed here, you can keep going, or you must keep going. So I rolled a 4, that's not a die roll of 1. I'm going to draw a 6th card, then I look after drawing the 6th card, and I see for 7, I need a 1 or a 2. I'll roll the die, okay, that's not it either, and I'll keep going until I've drawn the maximum of 12 cards. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. There will be cases where you might want the turn to end as quickly as possible because you didn't get a lot of bad cards for the upcoming campaign that you're going to have to fight. Other times, you're desperately trying to get more cards out of the deck because you want to get some of those good cards that you know are in there to come out before you have to do anything else. So this just keeps it interesting. You're never sure how many cards you're going to get. You can't be sure that you're going to get the card that you want. So there is a random aspect to it, but that is just a part of the situation, right? Like what is going to come up, what kind of bad things can occur, and it helps to reinforce, in my opinion, the need or desire on Napoleon's part to do things fast and quickly when he can. You'd prefer to move quickly. That way you have less time for your opponents to drag you down. If you strike hard, you fight fast, and we'll talk about that in the campaigns, you're going to be successful. So you're going to continue to play these cards. And just to show what some of that might look like, right? You start to draw cards and you look to see what's the event. This is an immediate effect. I lose glory, and the card gets removed. A lot of the early commander deck cards are like this. They penalize you, but they're not terrible. Now this one is pretty tricky. There's a die roll involved, and it could be that the game ends immediately. Now some folks don't like the sound of this, and let me tell you, it's not that big a deal. The early commander time period is fraught with situations that could lead to Napoleon's early demise or the end of the game. And that's not so bad, especially if you're only playing the first few turns of the game. It is very, very easy to kind of reset and start again. And that's sort of the replayability aspect that starts to come in. You know, whether or not you're going to get farther, what things do you need to watch out for? You start to learn what to watch out for. But you'll continue to play these cards and get these variety of effects. So this gets us more political points. That's great. What we get here? Oh, okay. So this is a whiff of grape shot. Napoleon helping suppress activities in Paris. You're going to lose some glory, but you're going to get some political points. Okay. At the beginning, a lot of these card events, a lot of these circumstances that are coming your way are things that you're reacting to. So you don't have a huge amount of agency at first, and that's one of the challenging things that folks will encounter. You will have events happen to you. And I think, you know, especially if you're on a certain life trajectory in the 1800s or early 1800s, late 1700s, yeah, you're going to have things happening to you. So it's about, you know, can you manage the events? Early on, there's not much you can do to make big decisions that will keep you out of trouble, but you do have one incredibly important resource in the form of Napoleon's luck. Now, having played this game enough, I almost think it should have been called something a little bit different. I think Napoleon's luck sort of makes this like incidental, but since you're choosing to use it, and in some cases, some of those choices feel extremely deliberate, I might have called this Napoleon, like it is thematically appropriate to call it Napoleon's luck. I consider it something more like Napoleon's effort, where you can spend this once per turn, so you flip it to its used side, and you get it back at the beginning of the next turn. You can use this to re-roll any die roll. So let's say I get a bad die roll. I don't like that die roll. I roll a 1. Roll again, because I can do better than a 1, no matter what it is. That's one way to use it. The other is to sync cards. So when you pull those cards, sometimes the card will say that you may do something. That's a choice. You can say, I will do that this time, or I'm going to save this card for later. I'll put it in the discard for now, and I'll expect to get that card later in the game, get that effect when I think I'm going to need it more. That's a decision to make. Sometimes you get a card that's absolutely awful for you, and it says that you must play it. The exception is you can use your luck to send that card to the discard and draw a new card. That card that you sank could come up again, but this is a really effective way to look at really bad cards or things that are going to really hurt you and kick, punt them down the road a bit. And that can be very powerful. And in fact, I have some strategy thoughts related to this. I don't think I'm going to share them because I think part of the fun of this game is learning these things yourself. But it is incredibly important. You'll start to learn, ooh, that's a card I need to sink. Of course, the opportunity cost is now you don't have that luck marker to re-roll campaigns if you're going to fight a campaign that year. Or whatever. So you've got to really think hard about this choice. Obviously, if you want to make this game easier, and I don't think you'd need to, I don't know that this game is, I think you can get good enough at this game to win a pretty decent victory consistently. But if you're really hurting, you could, I guess, give yourself free reuses of the luck marker or something. We'd call that super easy mode, but you could do that if you wanted, I guess. So that's the main sort of card play aspect. You start to work your way through that. Eventually, you get to campaign resolution. Now, there are a variety of campaigns in the deck. So the thing to understand about the campaigns, because they're so different, I'm just going to show an example of a later game one, which should be meaningful to some folks. Russia. So there's a Russia campaign, and just so you can see, there are conditions about when this campaign will be played and may be chosen as the active campaign if Russia is hostile or neutral, Prussia is allied and Austria is allied or neutral. So you need Prussia allied to actually trigger this campaign. You will suffer a glory penalty if you do not play it, and it's possible to be played. And you're going to have a -2, which makes it harder in that first combat round. If there's victory, you get to play a particular treaty card. If it's a stalemate, then you have to go to retreat from Russia. And if you get a defeat, you suffer additional penalties and trigger retreat from Russia, which is then forcing you to play this card if you stalemate or lose, which you can see some of the details there. So there's a relationship here in the campaigns where, in some cases, campaigns have relationships. They have relationships to treaties, and the treaties, and I guess I should show one of those really quickly just so you can see an example of them. Treaty of Tilsit. So if you win the Polish campaign, then this would be a victory in the Prussia and Russia campaign, and you get all these benefits for winning, or you get all these benefits from getting to play the treaty. It sets Prussia to allied, sets Russia to neutral, and some other things occur, and then this keeps Prussia out of hostilities for a certain period of time. Again, we'll talk about that in the diplomacy stuff. So the basic cadence here is that in the early game, you're going to draw cards that are campaigns. These are going to represent things like the Northern Italy campaign that Napoleon went on and early in his career, Marengo, those sorts of things. Or the Egyptian and Syrian campaigns. Those will come from card draws, and when they come out of the deck, they will be played in your campaign spot. There's only room for one card there. If you draw additional, they just go to the discard. You will have drawn cards that turn that will say campaign modifiers, and they'll have different effects on the campaign, like giving you a penalty or giving you a bonus. The strategy and tactics cards tend to be cards that once you get them, they kind of come into your armory, so to speak. They're the tools you can use to help you in campaigns. They usually have a cost to use them each time, but you tend to hold on to them for a little while. And then finally, you have commanders. And as you draw commanders from the deck, you place them here, and you'll get to pay a cost. Sometimes it differs based on the commander, to have them involved in the campaign. And when you get to the campaign resolution, you will basically work out the die roll modifiers, and the final result has to be somewhere between -4 and +4. That's sort of the range of DRMs for every die roll in the game. So you could have a +6 offset by a -2 and be at +4, and really +4 is where you want to be, I think. Wherever possible, do whatever you can, and you will roll a die. The result will tell you if it's a bloody defeat, a bloody stalemate, bloody victory, or victory. Now, obviously, a clear victory is always best. Bloody will give you, or any bloody result will give you a penalty to your domestic politics table rolls at the end of the turn. So you don't want bloody results if you can help it. If you get a victory, then you implement the victory. If you get a stalemate, what that will usually mean is you're going to lose some glory points as a penalty. Then you've got to go to a second round of combat, and you do so with a -1 to your die roll, and that gets cumulative. So if on your second die roll you get another stalemate, you lose more glory, and you now have a -2 for your third die roll. And it's likely that by the third round, you've already used up all of your resources. You tend to get those commander benefits or the strategy and tactic card benefits for just a single round. In a few cases, they will provide benefits like getting a plus or minus for all combat rounds, but you'll usually start to run dry of allocated resources by the second or third round of combat in a campaign, and you'll eventually get to a defeat in that case. And let me tell you, that hurts, and you don't want to do it. And in fact, if you can get things going to where you can complete your campaigns in one combat round, or in some cases, campaigns require you to get 2 victories to win, which is tough. Tougher campaigns are like that. You want to make sure that you get a victory on the first combat round so that you're done, or you're able to move into the second combat round without a stalemate. That's so important. This is, again, I think, feeding into that Napoleonic idea. You want to strike hard, you want to strike fast, you want to knock your opponents off balance and do so before they have a chance to react. So that's so important that starts to come into your planning for the campaign, the things that you're going to have to do to be successful, how much resources are you going to pour into that campaign to be effective. And not again, I don't want to get too far down into strategy here, but I would say you do want to win early and you want to win fast. That's very important. And then again, after you complete the campaign, you will put sometimes a treaty card here. Now, there's a special condition where if you've defeated a major power, like your Austria, Russia, whatever, if there's no longer a treaty card here, because once you play a treaty, it sits here. Eventually, it can be removed due to diplomacy die rolls. If you if you defeat a power again and you don't have that treaty card available to use again, you actually conquer the power. And when that happens, you flip their diplomacy marker over. You get a one-time bonus to glory and political points, and basically they're out of things until they become reactivated. And there are some cards that do that. So there is benefits to repeatedly defeating Austria and Prussia. Spain and Russia can never be conquered. Russia can become inactive. But these are just sort of these edge cases of things where stuff can happen. It'll usually be Austria or Prussia that can be conquered because you fight them so many times over the life of the game. That can happen. So that's kind of how the campaign works, and it is a big, important part of the game. Eventually, because I said earlier in the game, you have these campaign cards that come up against your will, and they just come out of the deck, and you get assigned to go fight them. Is effectively what's going on. Once you become first consul and emperor, it's a little more involved. Where in the early phases of first consul, you can choose some campaigns that you wanted to go ahead and fight, and you have some influence over that. As emperor, you don't have a lot of choice about the campaigns that happen because this is basically Europe reacting to you, right? The War of the Third Coalition was not necessarily one that Napoleon picked, but in that case, you're fighting Austria and Russia. So there's an Austria and Russia war campaign card that you would play. You would fight that battle, you would win that. Austria might go to neutral for a little while, but then it's very likely the next year you're going to end up having to fight Prussia in Russia and another campaign card. So once you're in the emperor phase of the game, you're basically likely to be fighting a campaign every year, which should not be surprising. And if you've managed to find yourself in a position where you don't have to fight a campaign, and there are cases where that can happen because you've made everyone neutral or allied or what have you, if you can do that, that's really useful because now you're not having to spend resources on a campaign. You can kind of, ideally get some of your commanders back because your commanders can become wounded. At the end of a campaign, you roll a die for every commander card you used or assigned. If you roll a 1 or 2, they will go to the discard. Some cards leave the game. They say it right on the card, but they tend to go to the discard. The one tricky thing with that is when you're dealing with the emperor phase of the game and the deck is really big, if your leaders go to the discard, it is hard to get them back, right? Because you figure, okay, here's Davout just got wounded. You will be sad and cry when that happens because you may never see Davout again, and he's one of your best commanders. So there's that to think about. So the campaigns, you're going to be, especially in the emperor phase, could get harder and harder and harder because your commanders start to get wounded, or they start to become unavailable. You're going to have to fight them continuously, campaign after campaign after campaign, and that starts to whittle away at your capability, and you start to have to worry about getting a defeat and eventually maybe it getting so bad you have to abdicate. So those are all key components of the campaign resolution phase, and how we get campaigns in the late end of the game, again, because you're not drawing them anymore. At the end of the diplomatic phase, or the tail end of the diplomatic phase, which is after campaign resolution, so you finish a campaign goes away, you move on after diplomacy is done, which determines where these other powers are at, diplomatically speaking. That will govern the logic that says, okay, well, because Austria is hostile, because Prussia is hostile, and Russia is hostile, you have to play the Austria, Prussia, Russia campaign card, and there is a card for that. Those all sit in the potential treaties and campaigns area, and you'll find that card, you will play that card, and going into that next year, that will be your campaign card that you have to deal with. Okay, so besides that, once you're done with campaign, you do have that diplomatic phase. This is really straightforward and simple. Assuming that a power is not governed by a treaty card, you're going to roll a die, 1 through 5. Then you either need to remove a treaty if it's there, or move that marker towards hostile. It might be at allied, it goes to neutral. If it happens again on a later turn, it goes to hostile. If you get a 6 or more, there's no effect, and you can use diplomatic points or do some point exchange to get some bonuses to have better likelihood of avoiding a power sliding down the track. Now, if you just defeated Austria, let's say, and you have a treaty affecting Austria in the current treaties box, it will say on there that you put them face down, and for the first diplomacy turn after defeating them in the preceding campaign phase, you don't roll for Austria, right? You just defeated them. There's no point. They have a new treaty. You ignore them. But then starting on the next turn, or at the end of the diplomatic phase, you flip the treaty marker. On the next diplomatic phase, you could roll a result that is maybe bad, or a 1 to 5, and then you remove the treaty. Austria might still be up here and allied or something, right? But the treaty's gone, and now you get the 1 through 5 on a future turn. Now it's neutral. Then you get through 1 through 5 again, and it's back to hostile, and you're going to have to deal with that. So there is a certain level of, once you've defeated a power, it could go to sleep, so to speak, for a little while. But again, there are different cards that could affect that relationship. So you're going to be juggling the status of these diplomatic powers. When you have Talleyrand, he's going to give you diplomatic points, so you can kind of throw in some support to try to keep somebody quiet for a little while. But eventually you'll have to fight them. And I do think what's really smart to do is try to be warring with as few factions as possible. Try to keep Austria and Russia separated in terms of diplomatic alignment, so that you can deal with just Prussia or just Austria at a time. I think that's the better way to go, right? You want to focus on particular enemies when possible, but you don't always have the choice. So when you're done with your diplomacy stuff, you know what new campaign is coming. Sort of the final thing that's really active is to do domestic policies, or domestic politics. There's a die roll you have to make. Now, you have a -1 for each hostile, conquered, or inactive nation. So you can imagine there's always going to be several penalties to your die roll. You get 1 for each bloody result, and you might have multiple, and they stack, so you're going to have a bunch of minuses. If continental system if you have allied nation, that's a plus, and then you can spend those political points, which you don't get a lot of very fast. You can get consistent political points, but it takes a while to build up. You can spend some of those to offset these penalties, and then you roll a die. Based on the die roll result, you're going to lose glory. So you can kind of look at this, both the diplomatic phase, dealing with this, and the domestic policy stuff only comes into the sequence of play once you've become first consul. So that big step up from just being a commander to first consul and emperor comes with it a need to gain glory, because you're going to be fighting a lot, which will help you get glory, but you're going to have this domestic politics drain on your glory. Every turn you're going to lose some. If you're fortunate, you might only lose, maybe you get lucky and you work out your bonuses and you don't lose any, or you could lose up to 10, right? So 0 to 10 every turn. You think about that. That means if you want to be increasing your glory, you want to at least be getting 10 glory a turn, if not more, to get to that limits of glory. So you've always got this dragging on you. You've got to deal with that every single turn. And you can lose a lot of glory from just this alone. Even transitioning from first consul to emperor, you're dealing with losses to glory. And there are other things I won't spoil that will annoy you, and historically annoyed Napoleon, to deal with, that are affecting your glory, that are affecting your priorities, and you have to deal with that. And there are ways to deal with that, but there are variations to it. So that's sort of the gameplay in a nutshell. So when you're done with your domestic politics, You do some cleanup, you check to see if you need to add new cards to your decks, you do your income based on the cards that are out there, and then you just keep doing that. And you keep doing that turn after turn after turn until either Napoleon dies or is forced to abdicate or some other game-ending conclusion is reached. Now, before I wrap up the gameplay mechanics part of this video, which has gotten pretty long because there's a lot. It feels like there's a lot to explain, but at the same time, the game is really not that complicated. There are things that, outside the sequence of play, are things you need to think about in the game. Will Spain eventually become a problem for Napoleon? Well, maybe, depending on how you use Napoleon's luck marker. Are you going to have members of Napoleon's family that will become annoying? Yes. How do you deal with that? That's a factor in the game. There are cards that will come out placed in the Austria, the Russia, the Prussia spaces that will bolster their capability when you have to fight them in campaigns. So you're going to see that start to happen. There is a Polish question. There are things there that you will have to decide, potentially, if it comes to pass, whether you should have a Grand Duchy of Warsaw or to try to establish a Polish kingdom, which Russia will really not like. There are decisions around who you're going to have as a wife and whether or not you're going to have either bastard or legitimate children, which is another sort of measurement of victory. And ultimately, in how you achieve victory can end up a couple ways. The historical result is that you're forced to abdicate. You do your 100 days Waterloo, but you did get over 100 glory points. That's the historical result, which is not a bad one, right? Even if you do as well as Napoleon, that's probably still pretty good. But you can achieve even better results by, having achieved the limits of glory, but never having to abdicate. I have won campaigns with that. You can try different things to get better results. Can you try to stay away from war with Spain? Is that going to cost you? Yeah, it's going to cost you. To do that, you basically need to be spending Napoleon's luck to avoid the cards that trigger Spanish hostilities, and doing that can really come at a bad time when something else drops on you, and trying to figure out what are those cards you want to sink. If you can sink a card during the Imperial period, that can be really good because it's hard for a card to come back up again because the deck's pretty big. But by the tail end of the game, you get out to 1814, 1815. Well, it gets a little harder. The deck is starting to get a little bit thinner, and you're likely to see some of those bad cards come up again. If you want to use your Napoleon's luck marker for your campaign to ensure victory, then you got to accept some bad cards, or maybe you're going to sink some cards and take your chances in the campaign because you don't think the campaigns are going to go that bad. But wait till you get 2 1s back to back in your die rolls, and then you'll be hurting. So there's a lot of things here. I can't talk about every card. I don't want to spoil things, but the cards are meaningful. The life of the game is that card draw phase where you're seeing the cards come up and you're going to have to make some decisions. You're going to have to see the way that the situation is developing. The cards are going to come out in a different order every time. They're going to maybe come up in better orders, harder orders, more difficult situations will arise than maybe you want them to. And I have found over the course of those many plays that each time is kind of interesting because it can come out in a just ever so slightly different order that you have to start heading down a different path. At one point, I got really lucky and I got a wife and a son very early in the game, so that was nice. But there were sort of like long-term effects to that I'm like, oh well, I miss having this other person as my wife because they gave me bonuses to things. Or what's going to happen if you do decide to open up the Kingdom of Poland. There are benefits to that, but the cost is Russia will always hate you. You will always be fighting Russia, and there's cost to that. So there are different permutations, different paths to try to take. It's not a grand open game where you can do whatever you want. You're in the lanes of history, but you do have some ways to make some different decisions. The cards are going to throw different situations at you that are a little bit different every time. And so there's just a lot more, guys, that I wish I could cover
easily here, but the cards, when you think about how many cards there are, there's over 200 cards. Each card is a little story element, and the order they come out in, the way that you respond to those cards, what you focus on to uh, respond to those cards, where you spend your resources, those are all the really big parts of the game. And I would not want to deprive you of the enjoyment by showing too much of that, but I do think it's worthwhile to explain here, besides just the mechanical explanation of how it works, that the game itself is not the sequence of play. The game is navigating the events that come out of the deck, and you have agency that varies in either a little agency, a lot more agency. Sometimes your agency is constrained by the world reacting to Napoleon, and you have to just deal with that. But there is agency there. There is decision making to be made, and again, you're playing somebody's life in one form. And think about your own life. You have agency, but you don't have unlimited agency, and we're all sort of constrained by things that happen to us, things that are thrust into our arms, and how we respond to it. And that, I think, is the nature of this game. So let me switch back over to talking about my analysis, my conclusions of the game, and we'll go from there.
So welcome back. Time to talk about the analysis of the game, my conclusions, what I think of it in terms of a real review. It should probably tell you something that I have played the game at least 10 times. I think there's always the concern when it comes to a solitaire game, a game that's designed to be solitaire, that there's only so much to see, that the replayability factor might be very low because there's only so much you can show, and so you play it once or twice and you're done with it. But I've played it 10 times, and I'm going to be honest, when this review is done, I'm going to play it a couple more before I put it away. There's other games I got to play, so, it's not because I just want to be done with it. I've actually really enjoyed the game, and I like playing it. I like just playing it over and over and over again, even though I think I've gotten pretty good at it. I think I can consistently get pretty good results. It's just fun to play. It's just a neat game, and I really enjoyed it. So, if you want to take that right away, it's just is it a good game? I think it's a good game. But let's talk about why. If you've read Histories of Napoleon, if you've read Chandler's Big Book, all these things, it's quite a story. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of events that occur, a lot of fascinating things having to do with the French Revolution and how that affects the transition to Napoleon taking power, and then all the wars of the coalition. Like it's a grand story. And there are a lot of good hex and counter war games that tell that story, and you can play through a lot of campaigns. You can play through individual battles and various battle series. But this game does a really good job of putting you into the shoes of Napoleon and saying, like, hey, here's Napoleon's life. Why don't you take a spin in his shoes for a little bit? And it just is very enjoyable to see, can I do well? Can I do better? If I had just made a better decision than he did historically here, if I don't let my ego overcome me here, I can make a different choice and maybe control my risk. Now, in terms of the real analysis, though, this comes down to trying to figure out, well, what makes the game interesting and fun, and where do the decisions come in? Because a solitaire game should have some agency. It should be about decisions that you make, and that should help decide whether or not you're going to win or lose. I think there's folks that are concerned that this game is maybe, it's all luck-based, or there's no replayability. I saw one person already, the game's only been out like a week or two, on Board Game Geek, giving it a rating of 1, saying that there's no replayability in this game. I don't know. I think that person has not spent a whole lot of time with the game, and I feel like it's a little disingenuous to just rate it a 1 out of 10 for that reason. So, you person out there in Board Game Geek, you're a silly person. You are very silly. I think the game has plenty of replayability because there's a lot of different ways that the game can play out, the order of which that you're responding to, even if there is a general trend, right? You know that you're going to go to this set of card additions to the deck. That's going to change the game a little bit, but you know how it's going to change the game. You kind of know what cards are going to be coming. But that's the same as like any war game, right? Like, here's the reinforcement schedule. I know I'm going to get this third corps doing this XYZ. Those things are expected. The nice thing is you don't know exactly how those things are going to come out, how soon they will, what card will come out first, how will that change what you're going to be dependent on to get through that next campaign or set of events. And actually, I made a list. I wrote it down, all the things, all the decisions that you have to be making in the game. I think that's what it comes down to. If it's a question about agency and decision making, this game has a variety of those things baked into the story that you are going to play through and need to respond to. And I hope that my list here isn't terribly filled with spoilers, but let's chat it through. Big one is, how aggressive is Napoleon? You can break treaties and you can force hostilities with nations to a degree, not 100%, but you can do it. How you decide to operate there is up to you. Do you choose to invade Russia, or do you take a glory penalty for chickening out? Do you break a treaty with a neutral country that you have a treaty with because you'd rather fight them now than fight them later? How aggressive Napoleon is up to you. There's limits to that, but it is a real decision that you have to make, and it can send your campaign down a good path, a bad path, or a risky path that could pay off big if you succeed. That's your choice. That's up to you. Do you want to do that? You have to make a risk decision, which is, I think, probably the second point I would want to make here. The game, appropriately, is kind of like a risk management equation. How much risk are you going to take on for the benefits and the consequence? Do you play more conservatively than even maybe Napoleon did? You might not achieve a great victory. Maybe you'll stay as Emperor of the French until the end of the game, but you won't be in control of a grand empire. You will not be the Emperor of Europe. You maybe did not exceed the limits of glory, but that might be your victory. That's the victory you choose. That's up to you. How big of a score do you want to rack up versus the cost of maybe losing the game? So there are decisions about risk management, and in fact, that's something you're doing consistently through the game. What cards to sink with your luck marker, or hold off and use that luck during campaigns, or use up that resource too early, and now you're in a very risky space because whatever the dice give you are going to be what the dice give you. They might give you bad results. That's your choice. When to use commanders, that's a huge choice. Do you use those resources now with the possibility that you're going to lose them for a while or lose them permanently? That's a factor. You have to decide, how do you want to address this situation and use your resources. And yeah, luck is a factor. Luck is always a factor in these things. You need to play against that. That's a big part of the game. You are making diplomatic decisions. Where are you going to focus diplomatic effort, so long as you have diplomatic effort? And again, getting back to that, when do you want to trigger hostilities with a nation that you have a treaty with just because you can? That might be up to you. You're making romantic decisions. Is it better to just accept Josephine as wife and what comes with that? And I will tell you that there are benefits and there are penalties for having Josephine as your wife throughout the game. You may choose to divorce her, like historically had occurred, and maybe you'll marry a Habsburg wife. Maybe you'll marry a Russian wife. Those are decisions to make. There are pros and cons to that as well. I don't even think I've explored the options fully there because I just didn't. But there are decisions to make. There are pros and cons on the diplomatic front, on the political influence that a wife might have in the French society. Those are things you have to think about and make decisions on along the way. You're making the Polish decisions, answering the Polish question, and there are effects. Grand Duchy of Warsaw versus the Kingdom of Poland. Those have effects that you need to make. I did talk about the commanders, the consequence of that. You're making decisions on your relationship with the Pope. There are cards around the Pope. And who's going to crown Napoleon when he becomes emperor? Those are things, not to spoil it too much, but those are things that you will decide and to take a stance on. You're always making small adjustment decisions on whether you're going to exchange some points to get other points that you're low on. At some parts of the sequence of play, you can exchange some admin points for other points and vice versa, and those different things. Those are little decisions, but they can become important ones depending on what you're trying to do. You do have to spend your luck, your effort. I think of it as effort. In one campaign, I consistently sunk the Spanish hostility cards, and that's why I consider it effort. I did not want to fight Spain. I did not want to have to deal with the Spanish ulcer. I did everything I could to sink that card every time it came up. That took effort, but that was a decision. I was committed to it. I made a decision. I said, I'm going to do it as long as I can. I do not want to fight in Spain. I want to focus on Austria, Prussia, and Russia, and that's a strategy. You can try to do that, and I think that's cool. You are managing your political capital. You are trying to figure out how often you want to spend it to offset the glory drain, so that's a decision to make. When you look at that overall trajectory of agency, you start with limited agency, right? You're just a commander. Before you're even a general, you don't even start as a general. You have to get some success and then get promoted to general. You don't have a lot of major choices to make. Some of this, your choices are somewhat limited. You have some choices, but somewhat limited. You're just somebody. You're being told what to do because you are not the leader of France. That starts to open up after Brumaire. You start to make some decisions. You start to have a little more control, but your responsibilities increase and the things aligned against you increase. Now you care about the diplomacy. Now you care about internal politics, whereas just a general, you didn't have to. So now there's more that comes in. You get agency, but you get more responsibility and constraints. And by the time you're the emperor, because you've crowned yourself emperor, you've created a whole new set of problems, but opportunities for glory. So you still have decisions to make, but some of them are in how you respond to people pushing back, right? The coalition wars. All that, I think, makes for good gameplay because it's not just about whatever you want to do. It is having to deal with something that you're forced to deal with. That's just part of life. And you're playing that from Napoleon's perspective. You have to deal with your brothers. Not to spoil things, you have to deal with your brothers one way or another. You have to get them situated. You're probably going to have to deal with problems that one of your wives might introduce into your situation. You're going to have to deal with commanders who are getting hurt, or maybe at some point, as you are fighting a campaign in France, being assailed by the coalition, which of your commanders are going to stay loyal, and you have to deal with that. There are a lot of things to deal with and react to and figure out how you're going to navigate the game to some victory, and it can make for interesting stories regardless. I mean, it's interesting to try to make something work. Even if you're going to be abdicating, you still want to play through the story, right? You're at the end of maybe a historical playthrough. It's still fun to play through it. I think that's why I keep replaying it. I think it's fun to start all over again, see what's going to be different. I've even done a challenge run where I tried to stay as first consul without becoming emperor, never choosing to crown myself as emperor, and see if I can just win that way. And let me tell you, I think that's hard. I don't think the game is intended to be played that way, but I decided to do a challenge run. That's pretty cool. I tried to do a challenge run. I failed, but I figured out a way that I think I could make it work if I tried again. What you're really doing there, not to spoil the experience, is because you're not going to war with as much of Europe at any given time, you don't get a lot of glory, but you still have things that are counting against your glory, and you're basically trying to run out the clock and stay as first consul for life until 1817 through 1821, the last turn of the game, without hitting 0 glory. And let me tell you, it is difficult. There are ways I think you could do it, but that's a challenge run. But that's pretty cool that you could even do that. I think Ted Raicer and Board Game Geek said, like, the game's really not meant to be played that way, and like if you don't become emperor, the game should end or something. But I don't know. It's your game. Play it that way. Try a challenge run. It's interesting to see how different the game is and what things you need to count on being different if you're playing that way. I think that's really cool. So, besides my whole analysis, I mean, I think this is a really cool game. I'm really glad this has come out. I'm really glad that I had the time to play it before I moved on to some other games that I want to play. It's a very neat package. It's pretty easy to set up. It's easy to reset for the most part. You've got to sort through cards, but it's easy to get back to it. The components are pretty nice. They're straightforward. All the tokens and counters are pre-rounded, thick cardboard. So it's not like there's like a whole lot to deal with here, just mostly the cards. You might want to sleeve them because there's a lot of shuffling involved. And if you just want to keep those in nice, good shape, you probably maybe want to sleeve them. I mean, they're not playing cards. You're not sifting through them all the time, but you are shuffling the deck. So that would be the thing to watch out for. But overall, I'm just really pleased with the game. I do think that the FAQ clarifications and errata should be updated. There's a few things that are coming out now that people are really playing it. We're identifying some things that need clarity, some things I was playing wrong some of the time that now I'm playing right. That will be clearer as they update the errata, so do watch out for that. I could certainly see where this game probably will, I hope, someday get a second printing where they can maybe correct a couple of those little things. But I think even right now, the game is worthwhile to get. Get it now, use the errata. There's not that much to really be worried about. The game plays really great. It plays pretty quick. Yeah, it might be a couple-hour game, but as you get better at the game, like you've played it a few times, you can play fast. You can get through it really fast. And again, for me, it's just fun to play over and over again. It's just fun. It's a fun experience. I think like a video game or like a single-player video game, the fun is the experience of playing it. Even if you've already seen a lot of what the game has to offer, just experiencing it again is something enjoyable. And this game is enjoyable for that reason. So for me, I'm going to sing high praise. I think this is a really cool game. I look forward to seeing if we're going to get other games like this. Will we get another historical figure with this system? I think the system is interesting, so I'd like to see it adapted maybe for other situations. I think that'd be really cool. So, Ted, if you're watching this, great job. This was cool. I really like this game a lot. I would recommend it to people who are interested in solitaire and Napoleonic games in general. This is really quite good. I really enjoyed it more than other Napoleonic solitaire games that I've tried. Very cool game. Very happy to have this. So please check it out. Give it a shot. It might not be for everybody. I think there are going to be some things folks are going to have issues with, that it's just not for them, but I don't know. Watch some of the other videos out there. Watch this. Get a sense of how the game is played. If you think you can jive with that, I think this game would be a lot of fun for you. So there you go, guys. That's the review. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it educated you about the game and convinced you one way or the other about if it's going to be worth your time. It was certainly worth mine. Very happy to have the game. So yeah, let's conclude. Thanks everybody for watching. Hit like if you like the video. Subscribe if you want to see some more stuff. And we'll see you in the next video. So take care. Keep gaming.